All right, thank you for that. Okay, as most of you know, I've been having sharing on some of Genesis, and I'm ready for chapter 4. And so we're going to turn to Genesis chapter 4 today, and we're going to continue on in some of the Genesis and um, some of the things here. So um, I titled it this morning, Are You Your Brother's Keeper? Um, and You know, let's just start at verse 1 in Genesis chapter 4, and we'll read some of this once. And Abraham knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. And she again bare his brother Abel, and Abel was the keeper of the sheep, but Cain was the tiller of the ground. And in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel he also brought of the firstlings of the flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and his offering, but unto Cain and his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. And the Lord said unto Cain, Why art thou wroth, and why is thy countenance fallen? If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. And Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. And the Lord said unto Cain, Where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood cries from the ground. Now art thou cursed from the earth, which has opened up her mouth and received thy brother's blood from thy hand. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shall thou be in the earth. And Cain said unto the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. I'm going to stop there for now, anyhow. And we could go into a lot with this scripture. We could go into, why was the one why was not Cain's offering accepted? And a lot of people talk about that, and it doesn't seem like he gave of the best, or he did it out of the right attitude, even obviously. And where Abel just it says he gave of his first, the best, his firstlings. And if you look into that, that was the best of the best. That wasn't just giving something out of grudgingly or whatever, but and if we start at verse 9 there, kind of is where I want to focus on. And starts out with a question. And he said, Where is there Abel, thy brother? Um, and it was a question that God knew and Cain knew where it was. But if you look at his answer there, it sounds to me, it sounds very arrogant. He's like, Am I my brother's keeper? I don't know, um, don't ask me. Uh, in the New Living Translation, it says, I don't know. Am I supposed to keep track of him wherever he goes? Um, like I mentioned earlier, you see Cain's attitude and towards his brother. And so often I think that's what really comes down to in church life too is attitude. Do we really care about people? Do we really want what's best for each other, or are we selfish and want what's best for ourselves? Um, he was not going to take didn't want to take any responsibility, even though obviously he was very responsible. Um, and at first I thought this is maybe a really easy question to answer. Am I to be my brother's keeper? And if I would ask, I think you would all say yes, that probably we are. And maybe some of us would say no, and there's reasons why, I guess, that you could say no. There's a lot of things that point that we're responsibility. We're all going to have to give an account to ourselves. But I would actually pay more attention if I was going to ask that question to you and talk to you about that question, is maybe how you responded, what your attitude was when you responded to that. And and I see an attitude here of, yeah, nah, that's not my problem. Um, so I was thinking about that um, that attitude. In looking in Matthew Henry, it says, when a person is unconcerned in the affairs of others and takes no care when they have opportunity to prevent hurt, especially in their souls, that person in effect speaks Cain's language, and that language of not caring. And a lot of people would, a lot of times we say, yeah, we care about our brother. Yeah, that's our duty. And but is it a duty that we neglect because of our own selfishness? Even though we would answer, yes, we. So, am I my brother's keeper? There's a lot of things you can look at in that, and I just happen to think of, it wasn't that long ago that in Michigan there was a school shooting, and the young man that did that shooting's name was Ethan Kremley, and yeah, he was convicted in court for shooting and killing 3 people. But something that never happened before is his parents were both convicted in court also and sentenced to 10 years in prison for their son's actions, which they had no part of. They hadn't, they can't, as far as I know, prove at all that the parents had anything to do with helping him in this. He acted alone, as far as they know. But for the first time ever in a school shooting, the parents went to jail. And so, what responsibility of somebody else's actions is on us? Do we take responsibility for our children's actions? They are individuals. They are going to make their own choices. I get that. But it's interesting that in the court of law, parents went to jail for 10 years for their son's actions. And are we that accountable to our brother? So does that mean we take responsibility for another person? It's just a question, how much responsibility do we have to our brother? Do we take responsibility? What does the word keeper mean to you? Um, if you look up that word keeper in the Hebrew, it's shomer. And it's the same word. It's used quite often in the Bible, but several places it's used. Once is on keeping the Sabbath, is the same. So as important as it is to keep the Sabbath to a person, it's using the same word to be your brother's keeper. And most of us think it's fairly important to keep the Sabbath and to be, go worship on the Sabbath. And so it brings out the different places if you look up that word, but that word keeper is pretty tying to that person. We're not necessarily totally commanded in Scripture to be our brother's keeper. There's no 10th commandment, 11th commandment that says that you're responsible for your brother. It's not that pointed in a way. It's not direct, a direct commandment that but there's a lot of scriptures we're going to look at, and at what point should we be a keeper? Do we start being a keeper when there's a big sin committed, like killing your brother? That was a big sin, and he was very arrogant about. So at what point does it start? Where do we begin being a keeper? And then who is our brother? If we're commanded to be our brother's keeper, or if we're supposed to be our brother's keeper, who is our brother? In John 13:34, Jesus said, "A new commandment I give to you, love one another as I have loved you, and so you must love one another. By this all men will know that you're my disciples, if you love one another." And then in Matthew 22:38, Jesus answered a question, who was which is the greatest commandment? And he replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. So who is your neighbor? Is your brother your neighbor? And do we love our brother as ourselves? And if we do, that being a keeper to him is going to start long before he falls into sin. And that there's a big problem, I should say. You know, the idea of the keeper, if you look into that word, into shomer and keeper, you know, it's to guard, to watch, to protect, to oversee. But it doesn't, if you really look into that idea of keeper and that word, it doesn't totally take ownership for what that person does. You know, they are an individual. They are going to make their own choices, and we need to let them make their own choices. But like I said, guard, watch, protect, oversee. Romans 14:12 said, each of us will give an account to himself to God. And you might say, wow, that takes me off the hook or whatever. So often we like to jump on things like that. And God doesn't expect me to, they're going to give an account. It's their problem. And we do. We live in a day of what they call live and let live. You just let everybody alone, let them do their own thing, which, you know, makes it interesting when they hold somebody's parents or somebody else responsible for somebody else's actions, because that's the culture we live in, is live and let live. In Galatians 6:5, it says, for each one should carry his own load. And you're like, okay, yeah, that's his responsibility, going on with trying to say, but it also says, carry each other's burdens in a way that will fulfill the law of Christ. You know, and that's not a contradiction. We're to assist in helping others. We are to help carry their burdens, be there, you know, be there close enough that we experience their pain. We don't want to just make excuses or take ownership for somebody else's responsibility. It is their responsibility. But we need to be there to help carry the load. And it says, you know, like I said, carry each other's burdens. And this way we'll fulfill the law of Christ. And in that, we do a lot of love. There's a lot of love. Sometimes we take so much responsibility that we make it easy on our person, on our children or whatever. And we just try to take that load, carry the whole load for them. So there's at times there's what I would call a fine line on what you do. But again, it comes back to love and loving like Jesus loved. You think about, and I already talked about it some, but attitude. And what is our attitude towards our brother? Cain's attitude towards his brother was very arrogant, very selfish. You know, he couldn't stand it that his brother's offering was accepted. He was accepted of God, and he wasn't. And how is my attitude toward my brother? Is it one of I'm jealous of him? My attitude of a selfish attitude or whatever. I want what he has or whatever. Is it a callous attitude? We don't want to be bothered by anybody else. What is our attitude? Paul says in Philippians 2:4, each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. You know, your attitude should be like Jesus' attitude. Not just looking out for ourselves, but looking out for others. Can we actually carry that attitude of Jesus? And, you know, there's just some ways I come up with to try to help have that attitude of Jesus. In Galatians 6:1, it says, brother, if someone be caught in sin, you who are spiritual should restore him in spirit of meekness. And I put down there, or could we say gently? Are we restoring them gently in a spirit of meekness? And to restore, or how do we how do we look at restoring somebody, or how do we actually and then I put down 1 Corinthians 8:9, but take heed lest by any means this liberty of yours becomes a stumbling block to them that are weak. Taking liberty in things that of freedom that we think we can do that makes somebody else stumble. And that's something we need to look real hard at. Is our taking advantage of our liberties. And sometimes we are a stumbling block when we are very skeptical of maybe a new Christian or something. I found a story, and it was written by Robert G. Lee, just a small segment of it, but it said, some months after his conversion, Stuart Hamble said, my greatest stumbling block has not been my old cronies out in the world, but the skeptical Christians waiting and watching for me to stumble. And so are we a stumbling block in that way, that his old cronies weren't there waiting for him to stumble, weren't skeptical of him on that, I don't think, anyhow, but it was the Christians. How do we accept other Christian? How do we accept our brother? 2 Thessalonians 3:15, do not regard him as an enemy, but warn him as a brother. And King James Version says, yet count him not as an enemy, but admonish him as a brother. Obviously, we are to warn people, but do we look at our fellow Christians sometimes almost as an enemy? That somehow, I don't know, we're so skeptical that they're serious or whatever, that we don't admonish them as a brother. Are we generous? 1 John 3:17, but whosoever hath this world's good, and sees his brother have need, and shutteth up his bowels of compassion from him, how dwelleth the love of God in him? And if we are a brother's keeper, we're going to be very generous with what we have, I believe. When we see somebody in need, where there's a need, we will share with that need. Or do we shut up, or don't have compassion to him? There's a story of a peasant who applied to join the Communist Party, and he appeared before the local party's secretary to answer questions about his worthiness to join the Communist Party. So the first question he was asked was, if you have 2 cats, will you give one of them away? And he said, yes, I will, certainly. If you have 2 houses, will you give one away? And he answered, absolutely. The next question was, if you have 2 cows, will you give one away? He said, oh, no, I couldn't do that. And the guy said, well, why on earth couldn't you? And the man replied, because I have 2 cows. So he didn't have any of these other stuff, so it was easy to say. So what we have, is it easy to give up? If I ask you if you had 2 vehicles, maybe I should ask somebody, would you be willing to give one up for the cause of Christ or whatever? So often it's like, when we don't have it, it's easy to say, point fingers and say, well, we'd be glad to give that up if we had that. Are we generous people to our brothers? James says, suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If any of you says, go, I wish you well, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing, what good is it? If we're just willing to say, yeah, go ahead, do that, but we don't do nothing about it. And 2 Peter 1:7 says, add to your faith brotherly kindness. And we talked a little bit, I guess, about kindness already, but are we sharing brotherly kindness with each other? Joe had been away from his family for 2 weeks and was getting lonesome. As he sat in a little restaurant to eat, the waitress asked, what would you like? Joe said, I want lasagna and a few kind words. The waitress soon returned with his order, set it in front of him, and turned to leave. When Joe asked, Say, what about my kind words? She laughed and said, Don't eat the lasagna. So, what is our words of encouragement? What is our kindness? Are we serious about being kind to lonely people and encouraging people? Acts 15:32 says to encourage and strengthen the brethren. You know, it's what we're supposed to do. Give words of encouragement. And Acts, well, in the King James version, I just read part of it there, but it says, and Judas and Silas, being prophets, also themselves exhorted the brethren with many words and confirmed them. Be encouraged, gave words of kindness. Hebrews 10:25 says, let us encourage one another, you know, and it also, if you read the whole thing, says, not forsaking or assembling ourselves together as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. So do you see the day approaching? Are you, you know, I talked about keeping the Sabbath and being a brother's keeper, where it come into the same word there in the Hebrew. And I think we all see the day approaching. Things are headed that way. And do you realize, I was talking to one of my friends that's going through a pretty major struggle, and we've had a lot of really good talks. And one of the things he said is, Brian, church life is so discouraging at church. And one of the things he mentioned about church, and they've had a lot of struggles at church, they really have. He's like, you know, he said, I need that so bad. I'm so encouraged when I go. I need that. And he said, and then a lot of people don't show up. And they don't really have reason not to show up. Do you realize you're actually being an encourager just showing up this morning and being here? You are encouraging somebody. I will guarantee you are encouraging somebody by showing up this morning. There's somebody that says, man, I'm encouraged that he was here this morning or she was here this morning. You are an encourager to others just by showing up. And it's one thing, is like I said, is as being our brother's keeper. Faithfulness. Oh, I skipped a part here. You know, if we get angry at a brother for no reason at all, or get angry at a brother. It's in Matthew 5:22 says, but I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother without cause shall be in danger of judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother, Reka, shall be in danger of counsel. But whosoever shall say, thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. And I guess it does say without a reason. But do we hold anger against our brother? And do we have anger? And you're not being your brother's keeper when you've got anger against him. Hebrews 13:1 says, let brotherly love continue. And I see that in keeping on loving one another, being faithful in that. It's not just on Sunday or whatever, it's continual. Galatians 5:13, for brethren, if ye have been called unto liberty, only use not liberty for occasion of the flesh, but by love serve one another. By love serving one another, just the servant attitude. Are we willing to be that brother's keeper, that we're just a servant to them? So are you your brother's keeper this morning? And what kind of keeping are you doing? Are you waiting till, I don't think you're truly a brother's keeper if you're waiting till they fall to do any of these things. If they're already fallen, yeah, we need to restore the fallen, we know that. But what kind of brother's keeper are we before that? Are we actually there caring for them, loving them, encouraging them, praying for them, showing kindness to them long before someone falls? Or are we the type of brother's keeper that's nagging, controlling, criticizing? Are we that other? What kind of brother or sister's keeper are you this morning? What list that I just read would fit you? Fit me? What does it really mean to you to be your brother's keeper? Do we love in a way that will keep others from falling? Or do we say we love in a way that trips them up and makes them fall? I believe this morning, if we're going to be a brother's keeper, we will encourage, we will love, we will pray, we'll show kindness, we'll forgive, we'll serve long before someone falls. Let's bow our eyes for prayer. Lord, we're just thankful again this Lord's Day that we can be here and we can look at your scriptures and hopefully we can learn from them and just help us to be an encouragement to each other. Be the type of brother that just shows up and is there for each other. Help us to be forgiving and loving and really care about each other, Lord. Just ask this all in your name. Amen. We'll have a closing song. Let us never love each other with a heart that's true. Never doing to us we have been due. Kind and loving to each other, gentle words we need. Thus we follow Christ our Savior, proving all His service please. When the heart is sad and lonely and the eyes with tears are flow, gentle words and deeds of kindness fall like sunbeams on the snow. Kind and loving to each other, gentle words to all we need. Let we follow Christ our Savior, proving all His service sweet. Let us help our fallen brother, him gently by, speaking words of cheer and comfort into life. Kind and loving to each other, gentle words to all we need. Thus we follow Christ our Savior, proving all His service sweet. In this world of toil and sorrow, many hearts let us live to serve our Master and each other's burdens bear. Kind and loving to each other, gentle words to all we need. Thus we follow Christ our Savior, proving all
and every one of us